Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps.
Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 155 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. In terms of season 9, this is episode 9, step 8 in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I said earlier in another podcast perhaps, or maybe in a blog, the first 6 steps are really all inward work, only unpackaging and unraveling yourself. Once you get into the second half of the steps and you're moving up towards all 12 steps, it's now taking what you've learned and committing it to action. Whether it's action toward yourself or action toward others, it's no longer just this sort of silent in your head, alone with a sponsor, like therapy might be. Now you have to take what you've learned and apply it and live it in your life. And this is where in AA, and it took me a long time to see the difference, you have what's called a dry drunk. And then what you have is called someone living in recovery. So a dry drunk is someone, well, like my dad, who quits drinking, is sober, stops drinking, but doesn't do the work required to live a life of recovery. This 12-step work isn't easy. You really peel all the layers of yourself off, down to bones and blood vessels. And then you put yourself back together in a way that's healthy, in a way that's humble, in a way that's grateful, in the spirit of service to others, so that your life becomes a meaningful example of all that's good in the world. Are healed alcoholics or alcoholics in recovery perfect beings? Oh, heck no. They're as broken and as addictively oriented as they were before they put down their last drink or even before they picked up their first drink. But the process and the work going into making you a better person is what, in the philosophy of AA, keeps you sober. So step 8 is one of the first real thinking about others step that you get to in this process. And so here it is. Step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 2 things you're doing here that are still you. You make the list. So for me, I just went through every year of my life. Who did I hurt when I was 3? Who did I hurt when I was 5? Now, the nature of this question is, who did you hurt while you were drinking? And so that's a different beast. In terms of how I'm doing this process now, not just relating it to alcohol and alcohol use, I started at the beginning of my life because it was easier that way. So I came up with a list, a big list. Now, some of these are people that I made amends to when I was in the program before. Some of these are people that I still have ongoing relationships with in my life, and amends have been made, and experiences have happened. And I have people on my list that I really hurt, this time around in the later part of my life, in the part of my life having to do with Roy, in the part of my life having to do with my marriage to Eric and my marriage to Kenny, in the part of my life leading up to Molly's death and in the years after Molly's death. For me, the hard part is I always have complex relationships. So it's always difficult for me to filter out in the dance where my hurt is and where the hurt of the other person is. This is not me trying to get out of owning my actions that hurt people. It's filtering out all those entitlement feelings that we talked about last step. It's all those feelings of the world owes me. It's all the feelings of being hurt. Some people would call it, playing the victim. We put a negative spin on victimization, which is unfortunate because lots of people are victims. It doesn't mean you're weak or bad or needy. It means you were victimized by somebody. So in this step, you make the list. So I just got a piece of white line paper and I made a list. And I went through it, just in my head and how I hurt these people. And did I feel like they had it coming? And, and there's a couple of people on the list that I know I've hurt. I don't know how. I know I've hurt because they've told me I've hurt them. The next part of this step is become willing to make amends to them. And so if you don't know what you've done to somebody, but you've hurt them, it's hard to make an amends. And making an amends is different than an apology. An apology simply says, I'm sorry. And there are varying degrees to which you can mean it, right? And then there's making an amends. When you amend something, you change it. So yes, there's an apology, but you take it a step further and you do something in yourself that changes your behavior that will make you not do that thing again. So Kenny has a son. One of his sons, I think I mentioned this before as well, sends him the nastiest, meanest text messages when he doesn't get his way. I used to think it was because he was drunk. Oh, he was drunk when he sent that. And he always feels terrible when he wakes up and sees what he wrote. And so a short time ago, I was looking at Kenny's phone and there was this nasty text. Oh my God, it was nasty. And I'm like, what the heck? Is he drinking again? Kenny said, no. But that was a while ago. He apologized. Okay, no, he didn't. He might have said, I'm sorry. But he didn't come close to apologizing, because when you apologize for doing something, the implication is you won't do it again. And that certainly isn't an amend. And this is his child that's really practicing sobriety right now, is stringing together a long time of not drinking. Listen to me being all judgy, right? But if I were this person's sponsor, I'd be like, cut it out, work the program, buddy. It's more than just putting down the drink. You've put the drink down. Now it's time to work on yourself. That's the dry drunk. And my dad was a dry drunk. He hasn't had alcohol since the 70s, but his behaviors aren't much different. They're just sober now. So in my life, I have several relationships where I've been hurt by people that I've also hurt. And it's hard to filter that out. And that will be the biggest challenge for me. So I have some friends that I've hurt. I have some coworkers that I've hurt. I have people that no longer talk to me, a couple of people here and there. I think the connections are likely Robin or Bo based. And so they believe something they've heard about me to be true, but they act as if I've hurt them or done something hurtful. And so how do I make an amend for that? Maybe I would work through this with my sponsor and not make an amend for that. I don't know. That's hard to say. The next part after you make the list is to become willing to make amends. And I've never not in my life, in my earlier sobriety, when I worked these steps, I never, ever had a problem picking up the phone, which is what you did a lot back then, and issuing an apology and an explanation that I'm working the 12 steps now. And I'm working step 8 or step 9 is when you make the amends. And that was very cathartic for me. I will say I had a couple of people I made amends to, former boyfriends, that one of the two, we started dating again, and that wasn't the intention. The intention was for me to say, gee, I'm really sorry I fucked you over. Have a nice life. And then, well, you didn't fuck me over, and let's go for dinner. And one thing leads to another. And then the same patterns repeat themselves again. So it's a little bit more intricate than I'm sorry I hurt you, and then your apology being accepted or not. So that's the 2 parts of step 8. So let's see what breathing underwater has to tell us about step 8. And as usual, it's a lot of words that seem to have nothing to do with making a list and becoming willing. So it starts off with, despite the higher economy of grace and mercy lived and taught by Jesus, he did not entirely throw out the lower economy of merit and satisfaction. They build on one another. And the lower by itself is inadequate to truly great tasks of life, meaning love, forgiveness, endurance of unjust suffering, and death itself. The universal principle is called transcend and include. When we move to higher states of love and transformation, we do not jump over the earlier stages. We must go back and rectify the earlier wrongs. Otherwise, there will be no healing or open future for us or for those we have hurt. Maybe you pass a test and you're smart enough to take Algebra 2 without having taken Algebra 1. But eventually in that class, you're going to get to a skill that you can't do. And you'll have to go back to Algebra 1 and learn how to do that, so you can then apply it to Algebra 2. That's probably the easiest analogy of what I think this means that I can give. 1 + 1 is 2. You learn that in first grade. And it doesn't become untrue as the math gets more complex. You may not use it as much, but it doesn't become untrue. With all of the animosity and weirdness with the Olympics and the boxers and gender and all this, lots and lots of people really insist that gender is not binary, that yes, there's male and female, but there's a whole bunch of variations, which is ultimately true. But healthy humans are born when a completely male person and a completely female person create a baby. That's just how reproduction works. So yes, that's a basic level of sexual differences between men and women, but it doesn't become untrue as it gets more complex. And by utilizing basic knowledge, I think we could all be a lot more sympathetic and empathetic and open-minded to the varying degrees of sex and gender that exist within each, within male and within female, and within the combination. So these things come to mind as I'm analyzing this. You can't skip over the basics when you're working on something complex, because the basics are what set the reality and what are the facts that are manipulated when things get more complex. So you can't understand love and grace if you haven't had merit and satisfaction. They build upon one another. God fully forgives us. Our forgiveness from God is implicit. It happens. But the karma of our actions exists here. So if you do something wrong to somebody, there's an energy created in that wrongdoing that lingers until the wrongdoing is rectified somehow. We must still go back and repair the bonds that we have broken. So the first thing that comes up for me is what if the bond is unrepairable? What if it's not fixable? And I use my child abuse as that. My dad has apologized to me several times, and I accept his apology because I know it is as sincere as he can give it. And he's not looking at it to be manipulative or to get his way with anything. I believe he means it from his heart. But it doesn't unmolest me and it doesn't unabuse me. So even though I've offered forgiveness, which I know is the best thing for me to do for my own healing, and it made us have a manageable relationship throughout my adult life, it doesn't undo any of the bads, but the energy around it is built more on love and forgiveness and grace and mercy than it is on tit for tat and punishment and judgment, if that makes sense. Also, we are not supposed to make amends to people that we think we've hurt who have been horribly abusive to us. And that gets filtered out and gone through in this step as well. Amazing grace is not a way to avoid honest human relationships. Rather, it is a way to redo them, but now gracefully, for the liberation of both sides. Some amends that are impossible to make come from a lot of alcoholics were veterans of foreign wars, and they have all this guilt for the people that they've killed. And so they drink to numb it. And so how do you make amends to a family you blew up? How do you go and apologize to a grave? I mean, you could, right? That's part of it. What was successful for a lot of people with PTSD, and some experiments were done with PTSD victims from the Vietnam War, soldiers that came home devastated by what they'd seen and done, was to go back to Vietnam and work in orphanages and social service organizations and food kitchens and working to help people. And by helping the people that were hurt in the war in which you participated, you make an amend for your actions. You can't undo what you did, but you can be better moving forward. And so I think that's a big piece of what this step is all about. More than making amends, we're becoming willing to move forward. Nothing just goes away in the spiritual world. All must be reconciled and accounted for. All healers are wounded healers. There is no other kind. In fact, we are often most gifted to heal others precisely where we ourselves were wounded or wounded others. We are only the earthenware jars that hold this treasure. To make it clear that such overwhelming healing power comes from God or the universe and not from us. Each of us is being prepared to be a healer. This is massively important in the philosophy of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is when we get to step 12, that you use everything you've learned to help the new and struggling alcoholic. You don't just get sober and leave and go on your merry way. The program works because people with 30, 40, 50 years of sobriety come to meetings every week and help those who are showing up for the first time. I know in my life after losing Molly, a lot of people listen to this podcast. And a lot of the people who listen are people who have lost children or suffered a traumatic event or grief or loss of any kind. And they will tell me that I'm so helpful to them, that my podcast is incredibly helpful. And I'm always a bit taken aback by that because sometimes I just feel like I ramble on and on here. But I also know that I'm honest and I share what I've gone through and I ask for nothing. I just share it and put it out there. And if you want to hate me for it, welcome. And if you want to love me for it, welcome. And that ends up helping people. So that's my way of being a healer. We learn to salve the wounds of others by knowing and remembering how much it hurts to hurt. So this can come from memories. This can come from having experiences that we relive again and again. This can come from a triggering event that reminds us of something that inspires us to help the person going through the event. It manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Oftentimes, our memory of being hurt comes from the realization of our past smallness and immaturity, our selfishness, our false victimhood, and our cruel victimization of others. It is often painful to recall or admit, yet this is also the grace of lamenting and grieving over how we have hurt others. So Kenny comes to mind the most for me. I criticize Kenny for being too forgiving, but he forgives me all the time. He's been too forgiving with me, I think. And I have to step back and shut my mouth because it becomes easy for me to continue to hurt Kenny. And I also know when I'm really angry at myself, I often project my anger onto Kenny because he's willing to take it. And we'll have a big argument about something that's not necessarily his fault. I'm having a hard day or whatever. And in the morning when he wakes up, he greets me like it never happened. And he just starts every day fresh. And that's an incredible gift. Unfortunately, everyone in his life takes advantage of it. And I'm perfectly judgy enough to see it in others. And I have to spend a lot of time in the mirror seeing it in myself. I have to be very mindful of how I treat Kenny. And I think if I have to pick a crash test dummy to do step 8 and step 9 with, it would be Kenny. Of all the people in the world I've hurt, probably him the most. It is often too painful to recall or admit, yet this is also the grace of lamenting and grieving of how we have hurt others. We have found at our conferences that safely constructed liturgies of lamentation can be very fruitful for social and personal change. So lament, feel bad, grieve at your actions, feel badly that you did that. Turn around and see what it felt like for the other person to have done to them what you did to them, right? Fortunately, the universe or God reveals our sins to us gradually so we can absorb what we have done over time, little by little, so you can correct, right? You can correct those who have offended you so that you can own what you did to them. So this is a huge piece for me because I always feel like, well, they had it coming. They were mean to me first. Yeah, maybe I hurt Roy's feelings, but he was horrible to me. Well, okay, but the two are not mutually exclusive. Him being bad to me isn't permission to be bad to him. Now we're no different, which I'm sure he would be happy to point out. Our family, friends, and enemies, however, are not as kind to us or as patient as God. And this is the truth. And I noticed this in my family. I have siblings that dislike me, and that's fine. They need a clear accounting to be free and go ahead with their lives. Often they just need to talk it through and hear our understanding and maybe our sincere apology. Usually they need to offer their understanding of the situation and how it hurt them. Neither side needs to accuse or defend, but just state the facts as we remember them and be open to hearing what the other needed, heard, or felt. This is like an art form. It's called redemptive listening or nonviolent communication. So AA meetings have nonviolent communication. When someone's speaking, you don't interject, you don't comment, you simply listen. And when the person is done, you say thank you and you clap. I remember being at a Baha'ism recovery meeting once, and a married couple was there, and the alcoholic was speaking. And his wife kept interjecting and interrupting. And finally, I had to say, I'll call her Susie. Susie, in these meetings, it's uninterrupted sharing. We don't comment on what people say. We don't editorialize. You need to keep those feelings to yourself in this realm. You can talk to him about that later. And she was very put off by it, but she didn't understand that the reason AA and support groups like this work, recovery programs, is because you have safety to speak. Even if what you're saying is fucked up in a million ways, it's yours at the moment, and you can say it and speak it and share it without interjection. Good sponsors will remember what you say and help you process it later. Notice in all of this, we aren't talking about making a list of people yet. We're talking about how we look at ourselves and how we organize what happened to us and what we did to others and how we separate those out because they can be all braided together. We have not developed much capacity for redemptive listening or fighting fair, and all of the Olympic stuff shows it. But now we are rebuilding society from the bottom up as honest communication skills are being taught to married couples, families, therapists, prisoners, and educators. Life coaches and martial arts instructors teach nonviolence more directly and more effectively than most Sunday sermons at religious education classes and church services, right? So much of athleticism is using, in my coaching of athletes, is using the athletic movement as a vehicle through which to teach and live by good standards. That the training you do to win the race also trains your mind and your heart and your soul to be a good person, that the two go together. So step 8 is quite programmed, concrete, and specific. Make a list of all those you've harmed. This list does not include those who've harmed us. Somebody on the list might have harmed you that you harmed, but you don't put someone on the list that you didn't harm. And you don't make a list of everyone that hurt you. No, that's not there. The plan is absolutely inspired here, understanding that it needs to push the addict out of their intense and immense selfishness. AA is the only group I know that is willing and honest enough to just tell people up front, you are damn selfish. And until you get beyond your massive narcissism, you're never going to grow up. At the beginning of an addiction, you might have your first drink because you're having a tough day, and it maybe is a logical choice. Once you've crossed a threshold into active addiction, and the most important thing now is the alcohol, regardless if your day was good or bad, there's an entitlement and a self-centeredness to it. Your whole life becomes about feeding your addiction, no matter what it does to everyone else. That's a very selfish behavior. And it's hard, if you look at an asthmatic, you wouldn't call them selfish for using their inhaler, but you would call them selfish if their whole life revolved around making everyone else kowtow down to their asthma because they're asthmatic. Poor me, I'm asthmatic. And that's essentially what an addict does. Everyone dances around that addict, and every decision is decided by the behavior of the addict. So there's selfishness in that. And it's not the family's job to fix it on behalf of the addict. It's the addict's job to fix it themselves. This is just like Jesus, who told us without hesitation that we had to renounce ourselves to go on the path. So there was all that, lay yourself down before the Lord. I give it over to you. I humbly remove myself from the equation. It's about love, not ego. I take myself out. Right. It's the same thing. In making a list, you forget how much you've been hurt and how much of your movements might have been retaliatory. Matters not. If you retaliated and did something to hurt somebody, that goes on the list. The why you hurt them or the circumstances around it do not matter here. If you inflicted pain upon somebody, it goes on the list. And that's very hard. It's a struggle for a lot of people to get here. So then it talks about liberal and conservative thinking, right? So liberal thinking are usually trapped in all the social connectedness. Keep affirming people's self-worth. Keep affirming their false thoughts in their horizontal affirmations. No vertical truth seeking here. So horizontal and vertical truth seeking are two different ways of thinking. And there was an analogy to the cross, which I didn't include in my last podcast because it was too sort of Christian-y based and not what I was going for. But vertical thinking is right and wrong, up and down, better, worse. And horizontal thinking is more of a continuum range, right? So you have black over here and white over here and all the different shades of gray in the middle, or male over here, female over here, and all the different shades, right? You can't function in a super healthy way with only horizontal, only vertical thinking. So in this analogy, liberal thinking is horizontal, right? It's all a continuum. So you're socially correct and you affirm people's selfishness. It's enabling and it has codependency, too much false horizontal affirmation, and almost no vertical truth speaking. Okay. Then you get to the fundamentalists or the conservatives, right? All vertical. They just threaten people with God's harsh judgment and then their own judgment. You're wrong. I'm better than you. But they don't necessarily teach people how to heal or how to make amends or how to let go in practical, emotional, and mental ways. So there's no teaching or contemplation here. So you need both. You can think something for months and do nothing about it and just remain inactive as you think it through. Or then you can just condemn somebody with no thought process on how to fix the situation. And a lot of social issues that people fight over, political issues, social issues, have too much of one or the other. And in our country right now, our very polarized country, this was really helpful to me because liberal government is complete horizontal thinking. Just horizontal thinking isn't going to work. And conservative government is all vertical thinking. And that's just a war state, a police zone. And that doesn't work. There needs to be a marriage of the two somehow. And this is what happens in this process of sobriety, where you have enough vertical thinking for accountability and enough horizontal thinking for forgiveness and love and empathy. Jesus has forgiven us, so we can forget about it. Catholic confession. This is far too vertical with almost no horizontal dimension. Their guilt problem was solved, and that is all that matters. It is a self-serving concern to alleviate just our own guilt. It is a loving question to say, how can I free others from theirs? So an amends doesn't just apologize one side. It gives the person receiving the amends freedom to also accept an apology and let themselves off the hook for anything they might have done in that process. Fascinating. Now we get into the geometry of the cross, what I was just talking about. Even the geometry of the cross should tell us that we need both dimensions, vertical and horizontal. Christianity is the religion of incarnation, enfleshment or embodiment, not spirituality or spiritualization. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates their brother or sister is still in the dark. Until religion becomes enfleshed, it is merely Platonic idealism instead of Jesus radicalism. If it's a method of control and religion becomes more important than Jesus, then it's not religion at all, not useful or helpful. Again, here's a whole chapter, and we haven't even talked about making the list, right? The second bit of spiritual genius in step 8 is that it recognizes how long it might truly take to be willing. It even uses the active verb phrase, become willing, to make amends, to help us see that it's always a process, to offer up an apology in a way that can actually heal the other takes wisdom and respect for the other. So it can't just be a blanket apology to make you feel better. You have to apologize coming from the understanding of the other. So KK, my spiritual mentor, her mother was murdered, and she's been in a lifelong process of writing a memoir about this. And a huge piece of her reality in the years after her mother died was forgiving her mother's murderer. She knew that she had to, on some level, forgive him. And in my grief groups, when people's children are murdered or hit by drunk drivers, the process of forgiving the person that killed their child is long. I still have so much anger over a couple of the doctors involved in Molly's death, and this is a process for me. I need to let that go. I don't have to make amends to those people because I didn't do anything to them. But in the process of making amends to the people that you can, you learn to forgive people that have hurt you. You learn the process of forgiveness. There's another theme that's brought up here that's debunked a bit. Love the sinner, not the sin. Okay, well, if you love somebody that commits a sin, you don't like what they're doing, but you love them, that's only half of it. It means that you still hold yourself over them in some sort of moral high ground, and you love them because that makes you the better person. I mean, you might actually love them, but the motivation behind your love is that you're loving them because you're better than they are. And by loving them, even though you don't like what they do, you're somehow one-upping them on the religious scale or the morality theme. I forgive you, but I hate your sin. So somebody forgives you for doing something, but not really, because they still really hate what you did. When you forgive somebody, like I think of KK and forgiving the murderer, how can she not hate that her mother was murdered? But in the ultimate of true forgiveness, you separate it out. It has to be separated out somehow. Like forgiving my father for molesting me. There are times that I don't fucking forgive him because my life has been a disaster in a million ways. That took me a long time to figure out. But he can't unmolest me and I can't become unmolested. And so ultimately, the most radical thing to do is just forgive him and pray about the things that made him that way in the first place. Willing to make amends. At any rate, we all need to do some internal cleanup work. Vengeance against the self or vengeance against anyone or anything else is not our job. It might take a long time to become willing to make amends, and that is why some people go to step 8 meetings for years. It's a long process. You have to really reshift your thinking over and over again. Instead of making lists of who have hurt us and setting about forgiving them, we now make lists of people we have perhaps hurt, failed, or mistreated, and then we do something about it. It might be a note, or a call, or a visit, or a meaningful gift, an invitation, or an outright apology. The universe will show us the best way, the best place, the best time, and the best words. We finish with a quote attributed to Einstein. No problem can be solved by the same consciousness that caused the problem in the first place. You got to step out of your thinking, right? Making such a list will change our foundational consciousness from one of feeding resentments to a mind that is both grateful and humble all the time. This is huge. If you're only thinking about how you've been hurt, you're going to be resentful. You're going to feel entitled. You're going to feel like you deserve something to pay back for your hurt. When you think about the people you've hurt, you now become humble. You now become in the position of the seeker of forgiveness. You need the forgiveness. You ask for it, or you make an amends. So let me just say it again. Making such a list will change our foundational consciousness from one of feeding resentments to a mind that is both grateful and humble all the time. So the breathing lessons, these were hard for me. I had to put it down and pick it back up and put it down and pick it back up several times. So the first thing we're told to do is write about some significant times in your past when you have hurt or failed someone. Begin to think about ways you can repair the damage that was done. So my initial list is all really recent things. Kenny, Gracie, Molly, my mother, and those all relate to my marriage and Molly's death. Then I wrote Jay, my high school boyfriend, David, my college boyfriend, Graham, and Chaz, my two sort of adult life boyfriends before I got married. And I just have I know that I hurt these people. Now, Graham and Chaz and I have all spoken many times, and we've rehashed our relationships and friendships, and we're in a good place. I don't need to re-amend them. However, doing this work in my mind is an amends to them because my treatment of them is what motivates this work in myself. So damage to men from prior relationships has been addressed to a certain extent. Going back and apologizing in person wouldn't be right. Sharing or blogging is a way that I make amends. Focusing on family can help repair the damage I did to my family and to my relationship due to my relationship with Roy. And then my current situation with my friend who's not speaking to me, she's so angry at me. I'll say it again and again, I'm supposed to know why, and I don't. I have a vague idea, but she has been unwilling to give me real specifics. All I can do is speculate and apologize for the wrong thing, which ultimately I'll somehow hopefully know what to apologize for or make an amends that works. So that's what I have here. Write about things you did wrong, things you might have done differently, and what changes can you make today? So this is what I wrote. I acquiesce to my weaknesses. I don't follow through. I've never been faithful. I left my family and went to Amsterdam. I drank and drugged too much. I have always bent the rules. I'm gullible and often do things even when I know it's unsafe or wrong. So I can slow down and be mindful and I can follow through. That's as far as I got with what do I do now? And it's because I have to really think through. These are all very vague generalities. I have to think of specific things so that I can think of the opposite, how I would remedy that. Next, when you have been hurt by someone who failed to apologize or make amends in any way, write about the experience and let yourself truly feel the pain of it. Now recall someone you may have hurt. How does remembering your own pain help you think about theirs? So that's always, how would you like it? How do you like it? How would that make you feel? Always, that's an eye opener for any situation. I wrote, in terms of being treated badly by someone else, Roy treated me so badly after Molly died. I was gutted. Doug's manipulation of me that whole year leading up to Molly's death, and then the drug addiction afterwards. My mother remarrying my father after he had abused me. A brother of mine asking me for money over and over and over again. Most of my big injurious acts have been processed through. Most of them have. My fear is that I'm being hurtful and not seeing it, like with my current friend. I have to learn how to see it. These were hard. And by the next question, part of being willing to make amends is being able to see the hurt from both sides. What did I just say? It can be difficult to listen to other people's experiences of the effects of our actions. Spend some time reflecting on how someone might have perceived your actions in the past. All right, so this brings my current friend to mind, and I'm leaving her name out of it because we have a current friendship and mutual friends, and I don't want to cause any unrest or be gossipy. It's not a public story in terms of who it's about. My feeling of being on the receiving end of some massive gaslighting over the past year may be giving me a feeling of entitlement. I obviously did something that she perceived as deliberate, and it hurt her. I'm not quite sure how to fix it. I may not be able to fix it. And my amends to her may have to be something that doesn't directly involve her. I don't know. I do know that I want to figure out what it is. I want to find out what I need to do to make an amends to her. As you reflect on those you may have hurt in the past, how often do you fall into the trap of making excuses based on their behavior toward you? What can you do to avoid this trap? How difficult is it to be honest about those relationships and your own responsibility? So again, my current situation with my friend came right up. I guess this would be right now with my friend. But in general, I am great at self-blame, although sometimes I feel like I might do it with a sense of entitlement. I feel like any excuse I use to justify an action is just that, an excuse. I feel like I already own all my mistakes and the mistakes of others. So my work is to look at both sides of the mistake a little harder, also to examine current situations and seek understanding. So I have to figure it out and understand it better. There were a lot of questions on this one. We all need to do some internal cleanup work. For humans, there is a slow softening of the heart, a gradual lessening of attachment to our hurts or our victimhood. There's a past identity or any need to punish and humiliate others. Keep in mind that this step is more about having internal conversations about your own role in past conflicts. So sometimes your list starts from every fight you've ever been in, and then you have to call out your piece of it. Only when you have come to some peace with your own hurts can you reach out to others. That has you write honestly about your feelings. So I wrote, I hold on to all the lies Roy has told about me and how my choice to be with him ruined my life. I hold on to that. I hold on to the anger that comes from being lied to and about. Perhaps I justify my own lies this way. I still have massive anger at Gene Connolly and Chris Rath and the school district people. Right now, I'm not close enough to anyone to feel like there's room for hurt. I'm trying to be still in the good way. And I'm not heavily invested in too many relationships right now. This is hard work. What changes in consciousness are you noticing as a result of working through this companion journal? Consider for a moment the one person you have found most difficult to forgive. Is it now easier? No, it is not easy for me to forgive anybody. Aside from myself, I cannot imagine ever forgiving Roy. He was and is so deliberately hurtful. Were I in active AA recovery, I believe this would take me a long time. I have to recreate him in my mind to see him as forgivable and to see that I could have hurt him. Doug would be next. He is as evil as Roy in so many ways, and maybe more so, because he hides it behind good sometimes. My mother and Kenny at least act out of love. They are sincere in their efforts. They do not wake up with the intention of inflicting pain. And some people do. That meme I got from my friend was devastating. I think about it every day because that was just such a deliberate thing. All right, so what are our breathing lessons for this chapter about making a list and being ready to make amends and then never talking about the list? Make a list of people who have hurt you in the past. With each one, feel the hurt that may still linger in your heart. Then hold each person in prayer. Place the person in the hurt you feel in God's hands. Slowly tear the list into small pieces, a sign that you're willing to let go of the hurt. I've made a list to tear up and I've torn it up, but this step requires far more processing than I can do in the week between steps that this podcast is doing. I can dip my toes into it a bit and just sort of commit to spending a lot of time over the next several months looking at this list. To become willing to make an amends, also, we become willing to how that amends might look. Sometimes doing one in person makes no sense. Sometimes doing one at all makes no sense, and you have to do a very separate one. Then you make the same list and you hold each person in prayer, or you hold them in a good space in your heart. So there wasn't an activity here. It was more meditation and reflection on what you did to these people. I'm telling you right now, these 12 steps are incredibly difficult and incredibly taxing and exhausting. And I keep getting real life examples and experiences that help me practice them, which I think is what we need. So today, it's a cloudy, sort of dismal day. I had early morning coffee. I've seen ambulances pull up on my street 3-4 times in the past 2 months, take people away. It's alarming. My neighborhood is aging, I think. I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like this is like a purging activity. I'm purging a lot of myself so that I'm ready to be healed. I know when I first started working with KK, I went off all my medicine. That was like my purging. I want to make CrossFit Games one day. I have some BHAGs, some big, hairy, audacious goals. What's your BHAG? I need to start all the small steps to go into accomplishing a BHAG. And I feel like I'm doing that. I feel like a lot of what's happening in my life has brought me to BHAG status. So last week, I forgot to do the 12 traditions. So here are traditions 7 and 8. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. By only functioning on contributions from AA meeting members, you keep the mindset of the organization pure. There's no agenda. There's no company that gives $1 million that now controls AA. It stays about the members, the people seeking sobriety. And then tradition number 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. So again, it's not something that's dictated and orchestrated by somebody with a degree and a lot of letters after their name. It's simply non-professional people helping other non-professional people. So those are 2 pretty important traditions. Anyway, make a list. Check it once and twice. Decide in your life who's naughty and nice, right? And channel your inner Santa. Be good to someone else. After you've been good to yourself, be good to someone else. Ask for forgiveness from somebody that you've hurt, or send them a lemon poppy seed muffin. I don't know. So be good to yourself, be good to someone else. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.